Happy Friday, everybody. Took a little bit of a hiatus here on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, but we are back. I'm Anthony. He is John. I'm playing with a little bit of a handicap today. My usual headphones are not syncing right. So if I sound a little different, that would be why. Appreciate you tuning in on this Friday, even though we took a little bit of a break, but a lot has happened in the last week and a half. We're going to talk about it and try not to be so rusty. At least I won't. I know this guy, John will be prepared. Me, on the other hand, I'll probably stumble through this thing as I usually do. But John Sheeran, good to see your lovely face again, friend. Hope your New Year is getting off to a good start. And can we still say Happy New Year? It's kind of late into January, right?
I don't think we can say Happy New Year, but I do think that we can say New Year, New Me to the AFC North. I feel like that's at least the one thing we can say.
Probably where we're that's probably also where we're gonna start. And we're gonna talk about a couple of different things, including Duke Tobin's comments recently. And as this bowl season has rolled on through December and into January, some possible targets as the Bengals officially have the number 10 overall draft pick. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. BLEAV in CINCY is the channel. We are brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, and you've got a few games left, college and pro, I guess, right, to figure out things and place your bets. Had an interesting wild card weekend, and some new faces in there, but some of the usual teams moved on, and now we're getting down to the nitty gritty and a couple more rounds, and got to get your bets in at FanDuel. So hopefully you got those in. That is linked in our show bio, by the way, on the YouTube channel. And we are also presented by the fans only company, FOCO, and to a link to specific Bengals merch is in our show description. They have exclusive Bengals merchandise. I know the holiday season has passed, but I know, for instance, my son is like jonesing for football cards and other kinds of stuff right now. So if you still want to get some gifts, birthday gifts coming up, all that kind of stuff, and you want something really unique and exclusive that you can't find anywhere else, FOCO, the fans only company, is where to go. John, you teased it, and there is a major shakeup in the AFC North, and some people believe that the writing was on the wall for at least two of the three teams that made the change, yet the running, I don't know if you want to call it a punchline, but something, I guess from the outside looking in to Cincinnati, it was a bit unexpected that John Harbaugh, a Super Bowl winner and a guy who's been a perennial Pro Bowl playoff coach, Mike Tomlin, same thing. No losing seasons in 19 years he was there. And then, of course, Kevin Stefanski, two-time coach of the year, let go of the Browns. It's been reported since that Harbaugh is now with the Giants, right? So that was kind of the immediate thought that he was going to probably land there. But Tomlin, it was kind of one of those mutual and I'm going to step away type of things after yet another first-round playoff exit. Stefanski, Cleveland's been struggling the last couple of years, but I think he's well respected around the league. And yet here Zach Taylor is the lone guy standing in the AFC North as the coach who retains his job. Not only that, Duke Tobin, who we'll talk about a little bit later, Duke Tobin is keeping his job. And it seems as if the Bengals, Al Golden's keeping his job. So the Bengals are running it back full circle while other teams are making major changes.
I think it's fair to say that it's kind of like the punchline type of situation
Okay.
because,
Okay.
like Zach Taylor, the perception is he's the worst of the four, right? Because Kevin Stefanski has those accolades next to his name, and everyone knows that it's typically not necessarily the head coach's fault in Cleveland because of the organization and the lack of stability that they have. But when it comes to obviously Tomlin and Harbaugh, with the fact that they always win, and Harbaugh has bottomed out a little bit more often than Tomlin because Tomlin never really did that. Yeah, it makes total sense. But I think people still forget that what just happened before Zach Taylor got here, and the fact that there was the same head coach for 16 years. It was just the fact that the Steelers nor the Ravens made any head coaching changes during the heart of Marvin Lewis's tenure. So there was just overall continuity within the division. But yeah, like the perfect storm, if you will, third, which the Ravens missed out. That was their Steve Scotty seemed very adamant he wanted to make a change regardless. And I think the Steelers, like always, wanted to keep Tomlin because they knew he was the best head coach for them, and he always elevated and raised their floor and their roster and everything like that. But Tomlin realized that he wanted to either have a change of scenery in terms of maybe coach somewhere else in the future, or maybe just stepping down entirely from coaching altogether. It doesn't sound like he's too pressed to find another opportunity anytime soon. Wants to spend more time with his family. I'm sure he'll get his pick of the litter next year if he re-enters the coaching cycle again. But no, I think it's fair when like BetMGM says like, oh, the best head coach in the AFC North right now is not Zach Taylor, right? Like the Bengals have kind of earned these jokes because the perception of Zach Taylor is a guy that gets propped up by the elite talent on his team, even though he has his own organizational deficiencies that he has to deal with, kind of like Kevin Stefanski did in Cleveland. But this is like no one really thought of Zach Taylor as highly before all this happened, and now the fact that he's the only one standing, I think the jokes are warranted, but it also does ignore the fact that Cincinnati is notoriously patient, just as patient as other franchises that have actually won more than them.
So this always goes back, and I'm digging in the archives for this one, but this always goes back to me. There was an article, I don't even know how many years it was, and it's by our buddy Jeff Hobson over at Bengals.com. And I remember, again, if I had the link, it was years ago, but it was during some of the final years of Marvin Lewis's tenure when there was a lot of pressure for the team to move on from him after playoff losses and then non-playoff appearances towards the end there. It was the fact that he mentioned that Mike Brown really likes to either emulate or we know this family has a certain set of loyalties to a lot of people, and that came true obviously this offseason, but they really looked at the Steelers and the Patriots with Tomlin and Cowher and Belichick respectively as that continuity and keeping especially when there is a taste of winning, and the Mike Brown has long valued that loyalty when there is a semblance of success, and even when there isn't, they are slower to move on a head coaching change. You saw it when Shula, that just wasn't working well pretty much from the get-go, and even so they stuck with that probably longer than most teams would have, that sort of thing. And so I kind of called back to that and I said, well, that's probably, whether people like it or not, that's probably the mindset of the front office, where they just said, we've had big tastes of success with Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin respectively through the years. We believe that in a weak AFC North this year, had Joe Burrow not been injured, especially with a 2-0 start, they probably would have been tops in the AFC. Obviously, this is all the what if game. And, it's a risky proposition in the NFL to operate that way. But the Bengals feel that they have the pieces in place, the coaches in place, that sort of thing. Biggest surprise to you when we're talking about three hot seat guys, Bengals figureheads, Golden, Taylor, and Tobin, all are back. Was there one that stuck out to you that said maybe that guy shouldn't have returned, and they maybe should have looked a different direction?
In terms of surprise, no, because I think
Right.
we kind of knew that both Taylor and Tobin were coming back, and if Taylor was coming back, there was no way that Al Golden was going to get fired. There's no way they're going to give Zach Taylor another chance at hiring another DC, especially in what could very well be his like make or break year in 2026. I feel like we've said this now 2 times, but eventually at some point, if you don't keep missing the playoffs, you can't keep getting the jobs here. That didn't happen in the 90s. It's not going to happen to Zach Taylor, despite the fact that he went to the Super Bowl 5 years ago. So in terms of surprise, no. I think that if this was another organization, then Zach Taylor probably would be on the outside looking in. Just looking at the history of first-time head coaches lasting at least 7 years with a winning percentage under 500, it's not particularly great company. Like the closest modern comparison that I could find for him was Ken Wisenhunt, who coached the Cardinals during that. He was like a second-year head coach when they went to the Super Bowl against the Steelers. He lost that Super Bowl, and he finished with just probably just under 500. But he lasted 6 years there. It's very rare for a head coach to have like a 45% winning percentage and make it 7 years without winning a Super Bowl or anything like that, right? But that's where Zach Taylor is. Like at least Marvin Lewis, I think at this point in his time in Cincinnati was just over 500. And obviously the context of what the Bengals went through just to get to the Marvin Lewis era, I think bought him naturally some more time. But I think right now with the urgency of knowing who Joe Burrow is, where he is in his career, and the fact that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are all in the prime, I think it speaks to everyone else on the outside looking in and saying, like, they got to go. They got to take advantage of this now, and running it back again with a head coach that hasn't really shown that he can elevate his team when things aren't necessarily going right. Like we always look at Burrow being out and how that definitely impacts it, and it does to a degree. But when like the team completely falls apart because your quarterback misses half the season, and the San Francisco 49ers are dealing with 10,000 injuries a year, and they're always in the playoffs and they're always in the mix, like I think that deserves to be a conversation. But yeah, I think just knowing who this team is, knowing that they always give everyone infinite amount of chances before time for change really happens, I don't think it was necessarily a surprise. But again, I think the outside world is always going to look at the Bengals and say, yeah, like this is kind of a joke.
Do you think that, because a lot of people now believe that, or they've said, I guess the hope, not necessarily a belief, but the hope is now that with Zach being the tenured guy, obviously some things to figure out in the North, but the tenured head coach and him having semblance of success outside of the AFC North, it's been a mixed bag with Harbaugh, Stefanski, Tomlin in his tenure. Is this now is this actually those teams making those moves from those guys? Is this, despite the hires that these teams bring in, does this actually bring an advantage in your eyes to the Bengals because Zach is experienced? Zach knows, he's done well, and Burrow has done well outside of the division. Obviously one of the tougher divisions in football, despite what you think about this year. Is this on the optimistic side? Do you think that brings an advantage to Taylor with a slew of new coaches now in the AFC North?
This should be the conversation, I think, because the Bengals decided that their best path forward in 2026 is to run it back in terms of coaching, in terms of organizational structure, in terms of all of it, except obviously the roster, which is going to see changes, right? They see that as their advantage, that running it back and keeping the same faces and just trying it again. They see that as the best path forward. Everyone else in the division disagrees, right? They want to start new with new head coaches. I guess Pittsburgh didn't really want to do that, but they don't really have a choice. And they've always, unfortunately for the Bengals, have had success hiring new coaches and bringing them in, right? So everyone is taking a different path than the Bengals. And the Bengals should feel like that's an advantage, right? Like there's no reason why you keep Zach Taylor if you don't feel like he's your best chance of winning right now. And if every other team is entering this unknown phase of not knowing what 2026 holds for them in terms of how successful they're going to be, it's very rare what we've seen this year in terms of the Jags, excuse me, the Patriots, the Bears, all bringing in first-year head coaches and all winning the division, advancing in the playoffs, most of them at least. All of them have like an established quarterback and, aggressive front offices and things of that nature. And only the Ravens really have like an established quarterback there. So maybe the Ravens can pick up where, Harbaugh left off and keep them competitive. But it's fair to say that the Browns and the Steelers are probably going to go through the mud this year. And that just takes out half of the division. So there should be an inordinate amount. There should be even more pressure on Zach Taylor and the Bengals to win now, while the rest of the division is trying to find its footing and get back on track. And if the excuse is, oh, well, we couldn't win the AFC North this year because there was too many unknowns and variables and new coaches, like that's just it's a I'm already hearing the excuse and it hasn't even happened yet. It's like that cannot happen. It cannot be excused to fall behind the AFC North this year when when you don't know what it's going to look like and you know what you have for your team with your coaching staff. That has to be viewed as an advantage, and it has to be the base of the expectations of actually winning the division, because everyone else in the division doesn't know what they're going to be.
That's a great point, because, and I'm assuming you didn't mention the Ravens of going through the mud because they have Lamar still on their team, right. Whereas obviously the other two teams have quarterback questions and a new head coach. And, usually you see, you look back to the Bengals in 2003 when Marvin took over, new head coach and number 1 overall pick, they took a quarterback. And so it's kind of a rebuild from the ground up there. Whereas, like you mentioned, some of these playoff teams with rookie head coaches this year, Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen, they already had the established high pick quarterback there. So they could kind of hit the ground running with those guys. And they weren't rookies. They had at least a year of experience under their belt as quarterbacks. So that's why they were able to hit the ground running. And that's, where the Ravens do have a distinct advantage with Lamar as opposed to the other teams. And so, that's going to be something interesting to watch. But again, as this team goes, as Burrow goes, and we know that as he's healthy, as he plays well, and when he came back from injury this year, by and large, he played well. He makes a couple of mistakes in important games, pretty much 1, maybe 2 each, and the margin of error is so razor thin with how the defense had been playing, and just a lack of clutch gene on that side of the ball. And you can even argue, closing the door on offense, that type of thing. It just was another wonky year for the Bengals. But regardless, Zach Taylor is the head coach, as we all know at this point. Duke Tobin is the figurehead. We'll see if they add other personnel, we'll talk about Duke Tobin's comments here in just a second, but it still feels like that the way that the Bengals are running everybody back, that it's that old, we know better than you. If you want to call it overconfidence, if you want to call it arrogance, if you want to call it whatever, we know better than you. And they do. A lot of those guys have jobs because, they've been in football all their lives and that sort of thing. And, I can respect that to a certain degree. But again, we're seeing comments in our live feeds and all that kind of stuff talking about, we're going to see a lot of the same results because of the way the front office operates. And if they don't change certain procedures, certain ways they do their business, then no matter how good Burrow is, even Superman type play like we saw in 2024, they'll be a competitive team, but probably not the team that we all expect with him as the quarterback. So to me, it just this move, while I guess it's expected, and I don't want to say it's negative. There are positives to continuity, as I mentioned earlier. To me, though, this just feels like we know better. We're fine. We're fine. That's kind of what it felt like from an outside perspective looking in.
Yeah, and I think it seemed like a good opportunity just to also like dip your toes into the water to see what you can get at. I say that while also thinking about how there's 9 total teams, I guess 8 technically, because the Giants are locked in on Harbaugh. There's 9 total teams that were looking for head coaches, right? And we know that the Bengals are never going to hire the quote unquote best head coach in the market or the most expensive one. Zach Taylor's getting paid like a quarter of what John Harbaugh's new salary is going to be with the Giants. They're just never, it's the same thing as free agency, right? It's just a different pool of candidates that they would look at. They're always whenever they do look for another head coach, it's going to be the same kind of coach that Zach Taylor was, someone who was young and inexperienced and looking for the chance to prove himself. Whereas like the Ravens could definitely hire an established former head coach. The Browns would probably, find the means to do that as well. I think the Steelers are also, the Steelers kind of take on the same mentality as the Bengals. Like Tomlin was just an up and rising coordinator at the time when he was hired in 2007. And it seems like the list of candidates that they're looking at kind of fit that same bill. So every team looks at different qualities in terms of hiring guys, but I do think that on one hand, it would be kind of interesting to see the Bengals get a fresh start as the entire rest of the division does as well, and you could see something completely unprecedented. But at the same time, while you have all these other big fishes looking for like their next meal, if you will, um, maybe knowing that the Bengals and their way, like it's such a hit or miss process in terms of them hiring. Maybe you think that they would miss out on like their guy if so many other close competitors are also looking for the same one. So I think there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of gray area with this topic. But at the end of the day, it was a month ago when we kind of knew that Zach was coming back, and nothing was really going to change that, and nothing that the rest of the division was going to do was going to change that either.
Real quick question for you before we move on to Duke Tobin, because like you said, the league is trending towards those new first time, especially offensive minded head coaches, that sort of thing. Do you think, because the chatter, especially among the fan bases of the Ravens and the Steelers, the chatter was that, quote unquote, the game has passed by John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. Those are, guys from 20 years ago, and the league is just a different league right now. I don't necessarily buy that, given the competitive nature that those teams were consistently showing under their leadership. But I guess also I could see a point where those are kind of a little bit more fast moving franchises in terms of making moves, that sort of thing, especially Baltimore. So I kind of viewed it as more like, a change of scenery for everybody was just going to be the right thing. But some folks are saying the game may have passed those types of coaches by. You saw Pete Carroll fail this year with the Raiders, that sort of thing. So do you buy into that?
No, not necessarily. I think with Harbaugh, he is a special teams coordinator who relies on both of his coordinators to basically like help win games, like in terms of make call plays, and he needs to get those hires right. And unfortunately, Todd Monken and Zach Orr weren't the right hires for him on offensive defensive coordinator. So he like when you're just that executive type of head coach, kind of like Marvin Lewis was for the most part, right? If you make the wrong hires, you typically end up in a bad situation. With Tomlin, I think if they had just found a successor to Ben Roethlisberger, he probably wouldn't be in the situation, but they never did. And they're never bad enough to draft one, and they never traded up to get one like some other teams did in the late 2010s and early 2020s. So the fact that he was just in constant quarterback purgatory never really did him any favors. And I think the fact that he's now gone gives them an opportunity potentially to be so bad in 2026 that they could potentially take one in 2027.
We pinned a comment earlier from our friend Dan the Man, and hopefully the audio issues. Again, I keep trying these bad boys. They're saying they're connected and they're not. Usually that's what makes the audio a tiny bit cleaner. Hopefully it's we're making it work a little bit better here, so it's a little cleaner. Apologies again for that. Nothing like having audio issues. The first show back from a week or so plus from having one, but hey, it is what it is. We're back on the air, and we'll keep working at it. But regardless, talking about the Bengals need to be all in on defense and that sort of thing. Let's go back a handful of days to Duke Tobin's, comments after. I have to give him credit in one way, John, because he fielded questions for about an hour. Yet some of those answers were hollow, again, showed that, that little bit of overconfidence in their processes. And I guess a lot of people were looking for that specific press conference to inspire hope. And there was a little bit of that, but there was a lot of defensive sword play, it felt like. And rightfully so. I mean, there's a lot of questions about things right now. And I understand he's probably on the defense and trying to defend his job and keeping his job when that's maybe not a popular opinion, a la the billboards and all kinds of different stuff that are going on. So let's kind of walk through this. What were some of your key takeaways? And I know you were tweeting a lot about this on X, about a lot of different things. I had a handful of takeaways too, but yours, as just kind of a high level, things you liked, maybe things you didn't like, and overall tone of this press conference in your eyes.
For starters, the quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but we're 6-11 How do I feel like we're a championship caliber team? You must think I'm an idiot. Well, that's how I feel. Not the best. Not what I would have advised him to say in that scenario. Smug as ever, unfortunately. That's just kind of how Duke is. It's how he's always been, fielding questions from the media. And that smugness, I think, is it comes from him being in that position for almost 30 freaking years. And obviously his dad being involved in the business and kind of, grooming him to be who he is today, being very secure and comfortable within that family, talking about aggressiveness and, fighting for his job and everything like that, even if his job, I don't think has ever actually been in any danger. I think the biggest takeaway for me, Anthony, was like I didn't expect to hear any sort of like grandiose plans about how they're going to get better. They're obviously not going to say that to us like out on a microphone, right? But just relaying the fact that like we believe in our process and how like we just need to stay the course despite the fact that this process that they're on has not led to anything positive in the last 3 years, knowing that the one time in the history of NFL free agency you actually started taking it seriously, you went to a Super Bowl 2 years later, right? That was the biggest evolution in their process since free agency originated in 1994, right? It's no wonder that with a generational quarterback combined with adding talent to the roster outside of the draft, that they're able to go further than they ever had in 30 years, right? It was one evolution that helped them progress. And it seems like they're just like, hey, like, we did that 5 years ago. So we're just going to keep like in this stage of where our organization is without evolving any further. And that's just, it's so obviously wrong, as every other team is evolving in ways to keep up with the Joneses, if you will. The Bengals are remain content with where they are. They made a big change a half a decade ago, and they're still like saying like, hey, like, remember how happy we were when we made that change and we almost won a Super Bowl? It's like that kind of stuff. It definitely rubs people the wrong way, and it's definitely a signal like, yeah, they just still don't get it.
First of all, we have a comment from Ryan. I don't know who Josh is. I'm assuming he's talking to me. Yeah, I'm in a garage, but I'm not in Ohio in January.
Who
I'm
is
in
Josh?
California. I don't know if he's talking all the way back to Josh Kirkendall, who headed up the Cincy Jungle site a long time ago, or who that is. But good to see you, Ryan. I'm Anthony. I'm not Josh, and he's John. So I don't know. Anyway, one thing that I took away, John, and I wrote a specific piece on this, a tidbit on Cincy Jungle, and I guess it was because it was centered around the defense, and it's centered around pieces you like, obviously guys they have in their future plans for possible extensions, that sort of thing. And then, of course, there was another tidbit that really raised my eyebrows. So the guys that were mentioned, DJ Turner, Dax Hill, Jordan Battle, and who was the other one? Miles Murphy was the other one as well. And rightfully so. Those guys all shined with increased time and increased roles this year, particularly Murphy towards the end of the season, but Turner was at a Pro Bowl level. And, so obviously those are guys that they center around. You can have your hems and haws about Jordan Battle. I mean, he did lead the team in interceptions, and he did play well towards the end of the year as well. But there have been some struggles in the secondary, no doubt about it. Dax Hill, valuable guy, not a shutdown corner, but I think a nice piece on the defense. DJ Hill on his way to be a Pro Bowl player, I think. So all of that is nice, namely omitted. And I guess I understand why, because of free agency. A Cam Taylor-Britt, more on that later, and Trey Hendrickson. Zach Taylor, when he took the podium after the season and he was asked about Trey Hendrickson, there's a path, and the Athletics Paul Dehner Jr. said the path is like, I forget what he said, the Mariana Trench, or I don't know, some sort of, major gorge. So there's basically no chance at this point, it seems like right now in mid-January, that Hendrickson is coming back. The element that really stuck out to me, and I think it was Jeremy Roush of the Cincinnati media who pointed this out in a tweet, was, but we need leaders. We're lacking some leadership. I think that points to some of the news that came about with Cam Taylor-Britt this past week or so. But it also stems from, okay, you like those guys, but you don't have you don't feel like you have certain defensive leaders, your glue, that sort of thing. And that also brought me back, John, to the Bengals had a defensive players only meeting when the defense was really struggling. And we kind of scoffed at it saying, sometimes these work, sometimes they don't. But who the hell is leading this thing? Right? I mean, who is leading this thing? Trey was injured, and we kind of felt like he maybe had started to have one foot out of the door. You got a bunch of rookies and or guys that aren't star players. The guys who potentially led it, a Demetrius Knight, et cetera, are guys that were struggling mightily at that time. So how much does that voice resonate? So in my mind, that little nugget about leadership on that side of the ball really resonated. I don't think that was an indictment of Val Golden, especially because he's back. I think it's on-field leadership. Who can you really designate on that side of the ball as a captain, a guy you can rally around? Who's your Sam Hubbard, right? Who is, your Jesse Bates or whomever that you felt like that was your glue on your defense. And so that, to me, are they going to go back to the well of, obviously high picks on defense, however many that may be, but are they going to look to guys that, again, were team captains on their team, were scholar athletes, were, Boy Scouts basically on their team. And that's going to be their mantra in the draft and free agency. Maybe TJ Slayton steps into a role like that with a year under his belt, but that's a big problem on that side of the ball, especially when you name those four guys and you say, we need leaders.
Oftentimes in the presser, it sounded like Duke was criticizing almost like Zach a little bit by saying that the biggest problem with this team is that they don't finish games. Like they've lost so many close games. It was like the biggest thing that he was upset about was not anything that had anything to do with him. It was just how the team was finishing some of these games that they lost when they probably should have won. And talking about like defensive leaders, my guy, you're like one of the biggest, most important factors in bringing in leaders on this team. Like Zach doesn't really have anything to do with that. Drafting guys in terms of like you're identifying almost exclusively guys who are just interviewing well and like you feel like match the character of what you want in the locker room. But if they're not good on the field, who's going to follow them as no, exactly. Like it's just like you need everything. You need the complete profile in order to develop and therefore materialize a leader, if you will. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson and Logan Wilson were supposed to be leaders here, but unfortunately, Trey was never like healthy for most of the year, and he entered the year in a piss poor mood because he fumbled his contract, and then Logan Wilson was benched 6 weeks into the season, then traded. So yeah, like when a lot of your picks on the defensive side of the ball aren't developing, they're not going to develop into leaders because no one's going to follow people that don't lead by example in the first place. So yeah, like that was, again, it was this contrasting type of statement from Duke where it's like, is he taking accountability of himself? Is he talking about the lack of effort from the coaches on this part to develop these guys as leaders? Whatever the case may be, yeah, like it speaks to how there have been failures building this team over the past 3 years, and I just really want to know what effort is going to be in terms of making sure that you don't have these whiffs in the team building process, whether it is free agency, whether it is the draft. And if you're, and again, yeah, this is what I originally wanted to say. This defense this year was supposed to be this youth movement and how Al Golden was supposed to develop all these young guys. And to a certain extent, he did that towards the end of the season with guys like Murphy and Dax and DJ and things like that. But you exited free agency with TJ Slayton, Samaje Perine, or Oren Burks, essentially as external additions. One of them became a starter. And again, like I don't think TJ Slayton has necessarily ever been that type of a guy, a glue guy that like people gravitate towards in terms of leaders. Like you were expecting all these young guys to just develop immediately into these leadership roles that it took Sam Hubbard, Jesse Bates, Von Bell, Trey Hendrickson so many years to do, and you were expected to be in one season. Like it just seemed like without saying it, he admitted that the plan last year was just completely bollocks. And again, I don't know what the faith is in terms of how it's going to be even better, aside from them just pinpointing where they need to get better in terms of talent.
Trying to work out these headphones. They are just giving me nightmares. They say they're connected. I promise. I don't know what's going on there. And I think it was brought up in the press conference too that, and I can't remember who it was, but someone harkened back to the those 2020 and 2021 free agency periods, and obviously what that correlated to in 21 and 22. So it was kind of non-committal, I think, at that point, but I think it was recognized, it seems. And that may be another, maybe they go after guys on, championship teams or teams that have gone very far. I mean, I know you talked about Oren Burks, and there were, that was mediocre at best, but he did come from a championship team. And maybe the hope was that a guy like that, especially who had a good postseason run with the Eagles, was maybe going to assert himself on that side of the ball. But yeah, either way, they need to get guys that are not only good. I love what you said about in the interview process, oh gosh, what a, great young man, great leader, great personality. But if you're asking them to tackle on the field and lead, and they can't tackle, how can they lead if they're not doing their job on the field? So at this point, yeah, you want players you can rely upon. You want players that are leaders, but you want producers, and you need producing players in free agency and in the draft. The Bengals cannot go into this draft with more picks, and probably we'll see what happens with Trey Hendrickson, if that's a tag and trade or what happens there, with more picks than you had last year, and say, hey, we got more picks this year. We're gonna load up, and that's gonna be the cure-all. Again, that would be once again the old Bengals way, and saying this is the best way forward, and we're just gonna do a small handful of barely needle moving moves in outside free agency. It just won't work. But there are impact guys, and they do have a higher pick this year than most. So maybe that makes more sense to them than it does to us.
Yeah, it's their highest draft pick since obviously Jamar Chase was 5th overall, Jonah Williams was 11th, right? So they've haven't been in this spot in at least a handful of years, and unfortunately, though, it's like so many times have they found themselves in a certain draft in which they're eyeing a prospect or two to fill a dire need, and wouldn't you know, that prospect gets picked right in front of them. So despite the fact that they are higher in the order, every draft class is different. Picking 10 one year is not the same as picking 10 in another year, especially with how your needs evolve, and how strong a class is or how weak it is in some areas. So this still needs to be an offseason in which, like, you can't enter the draft with several holes still on your roster like you did last year. It can't be you need a starting right guard, you need a starting linebacker, you need pass rushing presence, all coming through the draft, right? And that's exactly how the draft unfolded last year. And right now, only one of those 3 picks look like a hit right now. So I think there is hope in the sense of, like, your needs are more defined and they could be more manageable because they're just on one side of the ball, but it doesn't excuse them for not getting the job done and making sure that you enter April knowing that your roster is pretty much set. And maybe there is like a slight need here or there, but you feel comfortable with the 10th pick being able to contribute.
Well, we're going to get to the 10th pick here in just a second. I want to remind folks that this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, apologize for a little bit of some audio issues. These headphones that normally are just money are not working with me well today, but we wanted to bring you a show nonetheless. Hopefully it still is palatable to you. We are part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. And of course, we are brought to you by the fans only company FOCO. The link is in the bio to exclusive Bengals merch, as well as FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. John, who would you have you thought about, placing any bets, or what are you thinking about this weekend's matchups here coming up?
A lot of people like the road teams. They like Houston over New England, Los Angeles over Chicago. I think that San Francisco over Seattle looks pretty damn appetizing to me personally. The other AFC game would be Josh Allen versus Bo Nix, and then kind of a rematch of what it was, I think, last year in the playoffs. I could see at least 3 of those 4 road teams winning, but I'm not counting out New England right now. I think people are kind of fading them a little bit because of how good Houston's defense is, but Houston is not going to have Nico Collins. I think he's out with a concussion, and until Drake May, poops his pants in an important game right now, I'm rolling with the Patriots. I'm rolling with Mike Vrabel now that he's got a true franchise quarterback with a pass rush that is clearly dominant. They sacked Justin Herbert 5 times last week. I'm rolling with Drake May and the Patriots right now, and maybe CJ Stroud plays significantly better than he did last week and proves me wrong, but I would like to see it.
That's the big key about CJ Stroud. Right now, the Broncos are 1.5-point favorites at home on FanDuel. The Seahawks are 7-point favorites against division rival San Francisco. That may be a really interesting one. Those two teams just fight to the end. So a 7-point swing there in favor of Seattle is a really interesting one. The Patriots are 3-point home favorites against Houston. So that's an interesting line. And then you have the Rams as 3.5-point favorites on the road at Chicago per FanDuel this weekend. So some great games. Again, some kind of new, some new faces, some new teams or teams that haven't been in there the last couple of years. So that's kind of exciting. I know the Panthers-Rams game was an exciting one last week too. It was good to see the Panthers fight to the end there. But go to FanDuel and check out their 2025 playoffs odds and go place your bets on America's #1 sports book. Some good lines there to think about. All right. So Bengals sit at number 10 overall, John Sheeran, and there are a lot of different players that, namely on defense, that players are looking back. There's a running back that some people are talking about as well as maybe one of those generational talents. But I think a lot of people right now have their eye on defensive line or secondary. Now, with Cam Taylor-Britt's situation, it was probably not going to happen that he was going to come back with the Bengals anyway, but some things going on there. Who knows? Maybe even the old Bengals thinking about corner at some point, depending on how the board falls. Maybe they move back. I don't know. But if there is a guy, I always think back to, what was it, the 2008 draft when the Bengals drafted Keith Rivers, and they had their eye on Cedric Ellis, another USC Trojan defensive tackle. And Cedric Ellis ended up having a pretty solid career. He went 1 or 2 picks ahead of them to the Saints. So the Bengals opted for Keith Rivers. When you're in the top 10, if you see a guy, I don't know, man, and you think there's a threat to take him and you think that's a franchise-changing player on defense, I would go for it. So I think Peter Woods and Ruben Bain are obviously two of the guys that are talked about a lot up front, and rightfully so. I think Peter Woods is a very disruptive player and a guy that could be a really nice piece on this offense. I know a lot of people talk about Ruben Bain having short arms, but the guy just is a monster. He's just a good football player. And if you are moving on from Trey Hendrickson, if you remember, Trey Hendrickson was a 3rd-round pick himself. So he wasn't looked at as a perfect prospect either coming out of the draft. But regardless, those are two guys. We'll talk about another guy that I know a lot of folks around Cincinnati and in Ohio want to talk about too. Actually, a couple guys. There are a couple linebackers there as well. But I think those two are a good place to start here as we start thinking about the number 10 pick with the Bengals.
Yeah, I love Ruben Bain. I love watching him play. He's got the highest pass rush win rate out of any Power 4 starting edge rusher this year. That entire Miami defensive line is just they're just animals, and that's what's going to make the championship game against Indiana, who is also frenetic in the trenches. Is just going to be a crazy clash of crazy dudes in the trenches in the championship game. But Ruben Bain, obviously, I think he should be a top 10 pick regardless of his arm length. He would be an outlier in terms of being a successful player despite having sub 31-inch arms, which seems to be the scuttlebutt around him. Peter Woods apparently has some small measurables as well regards to his arm length, which is why I think some mock drafts have him kind of in the teens right now. But with a good combine performance, he could easily be in the play for 10th overall. And the Bengals have been trying to get a game-wrecking defensive tackle in the past couple of drafts. They were in on Byron Murphy. They were in on Walter Nolan last year. They missed out on both of them. I think Peter Woods would definitely be right up their alley in terms of what they would look for. I'm also going to throw out David Bailey from Texas Tech, who really played well against Oregon in the Orange Bowl in the college football quarterfinal. Kind of on the older side, but another really productive pass rusher that wins consistently and has a little bit more length to his game compared to Bain.
So, first of all, Dan the Man, we're going to start doing more further breakdowns. If you've watched this show or listened to it over the past handful of years, we do some mini clip-ups of some prospects we like and or we feel might be good fits for the Bengals. This is a guy, obviously not at number 10, but maybe first few rounds, Kamari Ramsey, a guy who's played on the boundary corner and a safety. That's a guy I've already got some clips ready to go to clip this up. So probably by next show, we'll talk about Kamari Ramsey, a guy I really like, just a versatile player. I see a little bit of maybe a Dax Hillish type of guy, but also just plays deep safety a bit well and one of the better players on that USC defense. So I like him, but we're talking about 10 overall. I do like him, Dan, and we'll break him down a little bit further there. Obviously, the a lot of Buckeyes in this class that are intriguing, and so a lot of people, and I get the intrigue. Caleb Downs, and Caleb Downs is I talked about him in another article I wrote on Cincy Jungle. PFF has him as their number 1 rated player. Some sites have him at 7. He's within the top 10, depending on who you ask in terms of, major draft sites, major draft nicks, that sort of thing. So I get the value. The Bengals have only drafted a safety in the first round. He's not, one of them's not even playing safety right now. He's playing corner, Dax Hill, twice in the first round ever. And the last one was 91 with Darrell Williams. So they don't go this route, nor do they go this route often in the top 10. I will say this, John. If the Bengals feel, and I know right now the trust level of leadership is waning about, their processes and that sort of thing. This isn't a player for player comp that I'm doing right now, but if you feel that Caleb Downs will have the type of impact on your franchise that an Ed Reed, that a Troy Polamalu. Polamalu was 12th overall, 13th overall. I can't remember where Reed was. If you feel that is that, again, not player for player comp, but if you feel that his impact on this defense will be as such, I think you do have to make that pick, despite the defensive lines that are there, defensive linemen that are there. If you feel that he is going to be around a Jesse Bates-ish type player, and he's still very good, I think you need to think hard about that. This, I think, using the Bengals mindset and how they view or not value the position of safety, I think they would have to look at a player like that and say, this is, again, not player for player comp, but this is the type of impact this guy will have on our defense from day one, which would be an Ed Reed, a Sean Taylor, a Troy Polamalu, that sort of player, for them to spring for him.
It's tough because, like you said, safeties don't go in the top 10. They don't go in the top 10 because they don't get paid necessarily like some of the best players in the league at some other positions. The Bengals had Jesse Bates right in their grasp, and they determined that he was not worth guaranteeing the second year of his contract. I don't know if Caleb Downs is ever going to be Jesse Bates, but if he is Jesse Bates, are the Bengals going to pay him? I guess people don't necessarily care about that because they're not looking 5 years into the future, which is when his contract would expire. But it is something that I think about regards to this team. They limit themselves in terms of how much resources they have at their disposal or how much money that they're willing to pay for some of these guys. And they may expect Caleb Downs to be an all-world player for 5 years and then say, hey, you're a safety. You don't matter anymore. Goodbye. And then hope to draft another one, right? I question if that's the right move to take with the 10th overall pick. Obviously, people who have watched him for multiple years at Ohio State know the type of player he is. I love watching Caleb Downs play. I think he is as clean of a player in this draft in terms of just not making mistakes and just always being around the ball, tackling well. His communicative skills are fantastic. He deserves to be picked in the first round. The Bengals have a lot of needs on defense, particularly up front. And those players are a bit harder to find and a bit harder to pay for on the open market. So for a team that, again, operates like the Bengals in the way that they use and don't use the resources, I don't know if drafting the safety 10th overall is the best use of those resources. I think they would need to absolutely crush free agency in terms of the pass rush, potentially a linebacker, if they were, in order for them to be comfortable making that pick. All I know is this, Anthony, and everyone in the comments. If they enter the draft still needing to replace Geno Stone, it is an absolute failure. If they are praying on their hands and knees that Caleb Downs is there 10th overall to save their offseason, it's already a failure. And then just picking Caleb Downs is like, is just them getting saved. So if that's the situation, I think that's a bad spot to be in. But if Caleb Downs is the best player available and you fill all your needs in the free agency, go for it.
And of course, two other Buckeyes where some people have them also going top 10, maybe even top 15. You've got Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, two guys that are very, very good players. Kind of throwing a wrench in the works a little bit for the Bengals at number 10 is Dante Moore of Oregon, saying he's going back to school. So that's one other quarterback that some of those teams up there, when you look at the Raiders, the Jets, that sort of thing, that's a pick that you kind of felt like, oh, okay, well, some of those teams will take quarterbacks. We obviously don't need that. So now some more good players will fall our way. If we'll talk about the Buckeye linebackers real quick before we get out of here, and then maybe your preference in terms of the positions that we've laid out, at least on this high level. I like Styles a lot, especially for, what the Bengals problems are or were on their defense. But what do you think about those two?
Arvell Reese he's an animal too. And
yeah.
I question what the plan would be if he is just an off-ball linebacker, if you want him on the edge. Maybe he's both. I don't know if I trust the Bengals defense and their coaching staff at this point to be handed a player like that, where you need like a pretty concise and clear plan about how to deploy him. I think Styles, like he's fine. Like I think he's a good linebacker too. But again, like you talk about positional value and taking someone in with the 10th pick, and they have to be like one of the best players at that position right out the gate in order to be worth it, right? Like Bijan Robinson was that at running back. I don't think the Falcons are regretting taking a running back that high, because Bijan is legitimately an all-pro type of caliber player and just that much of a difference maker. If you determine that that's who Sonny Styles is at linebacker, then that's a conversation. But I think right now you're talking about the trenches with the Bengals, whether that's defensive line. There's a couple of offensive tackles that I think offensive tackle might be in play as well. And maybe if he doesn't start immediately week one, I don't know if that's going to matter necessarily. But like that's kind of where I think the team right now is looking at it. But obviously things can definitely change in the next 2 months.
Well, for me, I think, Bain and Woods, like you said, are kind of top of the list for me. I mean, pass rush is key and disruption is key up front. And if you can get those kind of guys, I mean, Peter Woods, I know, some people talk about production and that sort of thing, but, there's some Chris Jones, maybe talk and other stuff and, different stuff that, the Bengals need a player like that. I don't know if he's that guy, but they need disruption up front. Bain is the guy that I think, is one, especially when you're looking at Hendrickson in a weak market unless the Bengals swing a trade or something like that. Right. Which seems highly unlikely. So to me, Bain makes the most sense. And then you kind of work your way down the line a little bit with what, what we've laid out there, but we'll see. And we'll bring you some more prospect profiles coming up here on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're going to drop the mic and get on out of here. We are waiting to hear back about a fun interview opportunity. Can't say who or what, but we're waiting to hear back on that. That would be towards the end of the month, and we'll talk about that if and when that gets locked in. But we're pretty excited about that. That'd be a good time, John. So hopefully we get that dialed in.
Absolutely, and just because I don't think we covered it, Dan Pitcher is set to interview again with the Cleveland Browns. He's one of a handful of candidates that they're kind of zeroing in on in terms of being their next head coach. Jim Schwartz is also in that conversation. Todd Monken, if he doesn't obviously go with Harbaugh and the Giants, but could be that another Bengals offensive coordinator becomes the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Didn't work out the last time, Dan, but it is an opportunity.
It is an opportunity, that is for sure. Thanks everybody for tuning in, whether it's live or after the fact. Again, sorry if there were some audio issues. I'm telling you, these things are saying they're linked and they are not, but I don't know what's happening, but we'll work on that. And we'll be back more frequently with a lot of different episodes on this show and the other episodes, other shows on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. And we are proud to be part of the Believe Podcast Network, as well as being backed by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the Fans Only Company. FOCO, go to those links in our show description. We appreciate all of you. John, you're the best, man. And we'll get this rolling again with some more draft talk, fortunately or unfortunately.
Peace.